Samantha moves to a new city and tries online dating. Samantha had always dreamed of starting fresh in a new city. After landing a job in a bustling metropolis, she decided to leave her small hometown behind, where she had spent years feeling stuck and isolated. Moving to the city was supposed to be a fresh start, filled with new experiences and the opportunity to meet new people. However, after a few weeks of adjusting to her new life, she began to feel more isolated than ever before. She was living in a small apartment with no close friends or family nearby, and the overwhelming city life made her feel like a tiny fish in a vast ocean. The loneliness crept in slowly, like a constant companion. At night, she would scroll through her social media accounts, seeing pictures of friends hanging out with their loved ones. The ache of being alone hit her hard, and she began thinking that perhaps meeting someone through online dating could help fill that void. Her profile was carefully curated, showing off her love for the arts, travel, and her new city adventures. She was hoping to find someone who shared her passions. She downloaded a dating app, swiped through countless profiles, but nothing stood out until one evening she matched with a guy named Ethan. He was charming, kind, and seemed to have all the qualities Samantha was looking for. His profile photo showed him standing in front of a beautiful sunset, and his bio was filled with witty lines and thoughtful commentary on the world around him. After exchanging a few polite messages on the app, they decided to take their conversation to text, and that's when the real connection seemed to bloom. Ethan was everything she wanted. He had a job she admired, loved the same kind of music, and was interested in traveling. She was relieved to finally feel like she had found someone who could make her feel special again. As their text conversations continued, Samantha found herself more and more drawn to Ethan. He was kind, a great listener, and seemed genuinely interested in everything she said. They exchanged funny anecdotes, deep thoughts, and personal stories. Ethan would often send long messages that not only made her smile but also made her feel understood. His charm came through in every conversation, and it was hard not to be captivated by his words. It wasn't long before she found herself sharing more than she had planned, discussing her childhood, her dreams, and even her fears. There was something about Ethan's attentiveness that made her feel comfortable opening up in a way she hadn't with others. The texts flowed easily, and the conversations felt effortless. He made her feel like the most important person in the world. He would ask questions that showed he paid attention to the little details, always remembering things she had mentioned before. "How was your day at work? You said you were meeting with that new client," he would ask, referencing their conversations from earlier in the week. Samantha was touched by how he remembered such small details. It felt like he genuinely cared. The thought that she might have finally found someone who could understand her was exhilarating. She began to look forward to their texts eagerly, waiting for his responses each day. After a week of getting to know each other through messages, Ethan's texts began to shift in tone. At first, Samantha thought it was just him being playful or quirky, but as time passed, the content of his messages became increasingly unsettling. One day, Ethan sent her a message that caught her off guard. "You should be careful around 10th Street tonight. It's not safe to be walking around there by yourself." Samantha froze. She had never mentioned her plans for the evening to him. The only place she had been going regularly was to the nearby coffee shop, but that wasn't near 10th Street. She brushed it off as a coincidence. Maybe he knew the area, or maybe he had seen her out and about. But then, it happened again. A few days later, Ethan texted her, "I hope you have your jacket tonight. It's going to be cold when you go out for your walk." She had never mentioned taking walks in the evening, and she certainly hadn't told him about her routine. Samantha felt a shiver of discomfort. How could he know these details? She began to feel uneasy, yet she didn't want to overreact. Ethan had been so kind and attentive, and it was possible he had just guessed based on their conversations. But the more these little coincidences piled up, the harder it was to ignore the creeping feeling that something wasn't right. As the days went on, Ethan's messages grew stranger. It was no longer just about warnings or reminders. He began sending cryptic, almost eerie messages about her daily habits. "I noticed you usually wake up at 7 a.m., he said one morning. "I hope you got your coffee ready." Samantha hadn't told anyone about her early morning routine. No one knew about her habit of waking up at the same time each day, and yet, Ethan seemed to know it without her ever saying a word. It wasn't just the times he seemed to know. He was also strangely precise about the activities she engaged in. One day he texted, "I'm sure you're sitting at your desk now typing away at work, but I bet you're thinking about that new book you were reading last week." Samantha froze. How could he know that she had been reading a novel on her lunch break last week? She never mentioned it to him. He hadn't even asked what book she was reading. The details were starting to feel too personal, too invasive. The worst part was that Ethan didn't ask for her daily routine. He simply knew it. He would ask about things she hadn't shared with him, like what she had for lunch or what she was wearing that day. At first she thought it was harmless small talk, but it started to feel suffocating. Samantha was beginning to wonder if Ethan had been stalking her, or if he was somehow spying on her every move. She tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was being paranoid, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her comfort level had been breached, and she didn't know how to handle it. She felt trapped in a situation. It was one of those ordinary evenings when Samantha received a text from Ethan that seemed to be out of place. "You should be careful tonight," he said. "The area you live in isn't the safest right now. Keep an eye out when you're walking home from the store." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She had never told him where she lived, nor had she given him any indication of her neighborhood or walking routes. She had been careful not to share too many personal details too soon, so how could he know this? It didn't make sense. Samantha's mind raced. How could Ethan know such specific information? She never mentioned where she lived. She hadn't even shared her work address with him. The only explanation that made sense was that he had been following her. The thought made her stomach turn. She tried to rationalize it by telling herself that it was probably a coincidence. But the unsettling feeling in her gut grew as their conversations continued. Ethan's messages took on a more unsettling tone. Samantha couldn't deny the growing discomfort that had begun to settle deep within her. Ethan would text her at strange times, referencing her day-to-day activities as if he was aware of every detail of her life. One morning, as Samantha was getting ready for work, she received a message from Ethan. "I see you're picking out your blue dress today, the one you wore to that coffee shop last week. It looks great on you." Her heart pounded. Samantha had indeed worn a blue dress to a coffee shop a week ago, but she had never mentioned it to Ethan, let alone described it to him in detail. The fact that he seemed to know this and seemed to be watching her made her skin crawl. It wasn't just this instance. Ethan had repeatedly shown up with seemingly supernatural knowledge of her habits and routines. The little things like how she always went to the gym on Wednesdays or how she preferred her coffee with just a splash of almond milk were starting to seem too precise, too personal. Every time Ethan mentioned something so specific, Samantha grew more paranoid. How was he getting this information? Had he been following her, keeping tabs on her in some creepy, obsessive way? His messages didn't just seem casual anymore. They felt invasive, like he was trying to get into her head, studying her life from the outside in. The mounting sense of discomfort finally reached its breaking point one afternoon when Ethan sent her a message that felt like a warning rather than a simple conversation. I hope you aren't making the mistake of trusting strangers too quickly, Sam. You never know who they might turn out to be. The message was vague, but there was a chilling undertone to it, as if he was telling her something she should already know, a warning she hadn't quite figured out yet. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like a direct threat, an unspoken reminder that Ethan knew far more about her than he should. Samantha tried to dismiss the thoughts racing through her mind. She reminded herself that Ethan had been nothing but kind up until now. He'd been supportive, engaging, and thoughtful. Yet the more she looked back on their conversations, the more troubling patterns emerged. It was like he was digging into every facet of her life, subtly and slowly. She didn't know how or why he was doing it, but she felt like she was losing control of the situation. The texts were becoming too frequent, too unsettling. That had once seemed harmless, but was now spiraling into something far more sinister. She started doubting her own judgment. Could she trust her instincts, or was she just imagining things? The night everything changed came unexpectedly. It was an ordinary evening, the kind where Samantha was winding down, reading a book, and enjoying a quiet night in her apartment. The city outside was calm, and she felt a sense of peace, thinking that maybe she was overreacting about Ethan. That was until her phone buzzed. The message read, "I'm standing outside your window right now. You look beautiful, as always." Samantha's heart dropped into her stomach. She didn't want to believe it, but the reality was sinking in. There was no way Ethan could know she was sitting near her window unless he was actually there. She quickly rushed to the window and peered outside, but she saw nothing. There was no one, no figure standing in the shadows, no sign of any movement. Yet when she turned back to her phone, another message had appeared. "Don't worry, I didn't expect you to see me." The message sent a cold chill through her body. This wasn't just an innocent message, it was a direct violation of her privacy. How could he have known where she was sitting? How could he have known anything about her evening? The realization struck her hard. Ethan was watching her. Her pulse quickened as she felt her breath catch in her chest. The sense of safety she had felt in her own apartment was gone. It was replaced with an overwhelming fear of being violated in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. Samantha's body was frozen in shock as she rushed to her window, heart pounding in her chest. She had to see for herself. Had he really been standing outside her apartment? Had he been watching her the entire time, waiting for the perfect moment to send that chilling text? She peered out of her apartment window into the dark streets below, straining her eyes to see any movement, any sign of life. The streetlights flickered faintly in the distance, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. But there was nothing. No one. She felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. If Ethan had been out there, he was gone now. She turned away from the window, trying to calm her breathing. Her mind raced, struggling to understand the situation. Was it all just a sick joke? Maybe she was overreacting? She shook her head. No, this wasn't a joke. There was no way Ethan could have known she was sitting by the window unless he had been there watching her. But then, as she walked back to her phone, another message from Ethan appeared. "You didn't see me, but I saw you." The cold dread that surged through her body was suffocating. This wasn't normal. This wasn't someone who cared about her. This was a person who had crossed a line, and Samantha had no idea how far Ethan was willing to go. The fear of what was happening hit Samantha like a freight train. She couldn't shake the unease in her gut. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the terrifying truth. Ethan had been in her life long before she had realized it. His messages weren't just some quirky, harmless texting. They were evidence of something far darker. He had been tracking her movements, perhaps even following her, His next message cemented that thought in her mind. You didn't see me, but I saw you. The words hung in the air, and Samantha couldn't get rid of the image of Ethan standing outside her window, watching her. How long had he been watching her? Was this just the beginning of something much worse? Her mind raced as she thought about all the possible scenarios, each one worse than the last. At that moment, Samantha knew she couldn't ignore this any longer. She had to get him out of her life. But how? He had already crossed a line, and now the line was blurred. She didn't know what to believe anymore.